My name is John Welch. I am the co-founder of Overt TV and co-host of the show Catholic Late Night on YouTube. I'm also a porn addict and have been for the last 17 years of my life since I was 9 years old. I want to share my journey with you today. I want to share the things that I've learned along the way. Through professional counseling, extensive research and study into early childhood development, childhood psychology, adult psychology, trauma, emotional and physical trauma, and also my own experience of working through many of these exercises and mental mindfulness practices that have helped me make progress in my porn addiction. At my current place in life, I am infinitely more at peace with myself and with God. I have a deeper relationship with God than I've ever had, and I understand the journey that I'm on. I understand the process that I am engaged in of overcoming porn addiction. And I don't have so much of the guilt and the shame and the fear and the self-doubt and the self-hatred that I used to have. I no longer see God as an angry tyrant who is trying to dominate me, but instead is a loving Father who is calling me to Him and is actually using pornography as a means to do that. Basically, I've grown significantly through my porn addiction, and I'm much better now than I was, but I still struggle with it. And I think that that's important because there are many people trying to tell young folks how to overcome porn addiction that are not in it right now. And the reason why I think it's different is that up until recently, most of the people who have beaten porn addiction or have come out on the other side of it have been folks who got into it later in life. Maybe they were in their 20s, right, or their 30s even, or at least end of their high school time. And they realized, maybe later on, a few years later, 10, 15 years later, that they shouldn't be doing that anymore, and they were able to stop. And those folks have been trying to help younger people with their pornography problems. But the issue is that if you get into pornography addiction at the end of your, teenage years or at any point in adulthood, the effect it has on your brain is vastly different than if you've gotten into it when you were a child. Between, puberty, so the ages of, 10, 11 to 21, 22, 23, the human brain basically becomes unbelievably soft and malleable. And in that time, it's forming its view of the world. The brain is basically coming to understand how it's supposed to experience the world around it. And when you put pornography into that soft stage of the brain, basically for the entire time, right? Because most pornography addicts start in their very early years, right? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And so when you put pornography into that scenario, while the brain is soft like that, you're basically training your brain to have a worldview that includes pornography. And this is a very different thing than getting into porn later in life when you've already had a mostly healthy childhood. And so there's a very significant difference between someone who's been a porn addict since they were 9 or who got into porn when they were 9 or 10 and someone who started looking at porn in their early 20s. And that difference has led to a lot of folks who are trying to help people with pornography addiction kind of miss the mark a little bit in communicating because they don't have the same experience that these younger people do. They don't have the experience of someone who started very young and who now finds themselves with this pornography addiction as basically a part of their identity. And while they hate it and they want to get rid of it and get it out of their life, they are significantly more addicted, significantly more attached to this thing than someone who got into it later in life. And so I think that's an important distinction to make. So to start off with, I am a father and a husband. I have a son. I have a wife. And I've been, for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been very, very dedicated to getting porn out of my life. I started looking at porn when I was 9. I basically typed in naked women into Google. I don't know why I did it. I'm not sure what led me to do that. Looking back now, I know that there were some deep emotional wounds that I was trying to hide from and to get, medication for, right? Take the pain away. But at the time, I just know that I wanted to look at naked women. So I typed it into Google. This was the very early stages of the internet when that was just becoming a thing. And I found a pornography site and, down the rabbit hole I went. And so from that point on, I had some periods where I was able to get out of it for a while. For about 3 years in high school, I was completely clean. And then in college, I kind of got back into it. And basically, up until about 21 or 22 years of age, I just had no idea what to do about it, right? I was very helpless and honestly a little bit hopeless. When I was the summer between my junior year of college and my senior year of college, I had a mental breakdown and went to see a Catholic psychologist who was very helpful in kind of putting me back on the track of mental and emotional healing. But that started about a 6-year journey that I'm still on now. It's been about 6 years since that point. And in that journey is where the bulk of what I want to share with you today has happened. Most of the things that I have learned, most of the changes that have occurred in my life have been the result of deep prayer associated with almost manic activity. I've never stopped trying to figure out how to quit looking at porn, and I've always made that a significant focus of my life over the past 6 years. But at the same time, I also have tried my hardest to include God in that process. And I think that is the biggest reason why I've made any of the progress that I've made. And so that's my story to now. I don't know how it ends, but that's how I got to where I am. I don't have particular credentials around this, except that my own personal experience has been pretty broad, considering the fact that I am a porn addict and I have seen things work. I've seen things not work. I've made progress. I've healed on many levels and in many ways. And I want to share that with you today. So we're going to start with where to start in fighting your porn addiction. What I have found is that the number one issue for the porn addict who wants to start recovering, who really wants to make changes in their life, the number one issue is your image of God and your image of yourself. That really is the key to everything to start. There's a really good chance, if you're a porn addict, that you have some pretty significant emotional issues. They're probably tied to your early childhood. And along with that, it's probably safe to say that you have a broken image of God. Many of us in the Catholic world that grew up Catholic, we were taught a very distorted view of God. We see him as a tyrant, an angry, demanding, domineering ruler who basically is, waiting for us to screw up so that he can, smite us out of existence. And there's many reasons for why this is the case, but the reality is that's not God. The first commandment is, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no strange gods before me. And that's interesting to me because, I think that it's far more common for people to have a false God in that they don't actually know who God is than the version that most people say, which is, is money your God, or is power your God, right? Or is God your God? I think it's far more likely that a fake God is your God. The false God is the God that you think you know, not the God that truly is. And that's the most important thing. Do you know who God is? If you're starting this process to recovery, and at the same time you believe that God is demanding something from you, God is sitting there tapping his foot basically, or tapping his watch, saying, when are you going to get here? When are you going to stop looking at porn? If that's your image of God, you're going to have a very difficult time making any progress, because what that's going to do to you mentally, what that's going to do to you emotionally is going to keep you trapped in your addiction. The first thing that has to happen if you want to fight your porn addiction in a real and meaningful way is you are going to have to learn who God is. And the only way to do that is to ask him. It's to go in prayer to him and say, Lord, I know I don't know who you are. I know I don't see you correctly. I need you to show me. I need you to show me the fatherly, heavenly love that you have for me. I had a very big breakthrough in my own life regarding this way of looking at God, because I was in prayer at daily mass one day, and I was thinking about my own son and how if my son simply looks at me with, a contrite look on his face, it melts my heart immediately, and it basically just wipes the slate clean, right? He doesn't even have to say he's sorry. He just has to look like he's sad. He just has to look like he's in distress, and whatever's wrong, anything just goes away immediately, and my heart just becomes his. And in that moment of prayer, as I was thinking about my son that way, I had this vision of God looking at me that way. And I realized that every emotion I've ever felt towards my son, every way that I look at him, every feeling of love and of the desire to help and to be there for him and to forgive him and to welcome him back, every single one of those feelings is not just from God, it is God's feeling. We only have our own fatherhood because of God. And so that is God's fatherhood. And that was a very powerful moment for me, because from that moment on, I began to see God differently. I began to believe that he is who he says he is. So that's the first thing. If you want to start fighting your addiction, you have to address your image of God. Do you believe that God is who he says he is? Do you believe that he loves you in the depths of your heart the way that he says he does? The next thing there is your image of yourself. Because if you believe that God looks at you ready to just wipe you off the face of the earth at the slightest provocation, then what does that say about how you see yourself, right? You see yourself as someone who deserves to be wiped off the earth at the slightest provocation. And that couldn't be further from the truth. God sent Jesus to this earth because he so deeply desires to be one with us. And he died on the cross because he so deeply desires for us to be able to reach heaven. Does a God who does all of that and who clearly tries so hard and does such heroic and in our human mind insane things for us, does that sound like the same God who wants to wipe you off the earth? And if that's the case, then what does it say about you if you can't see yourself as anything more than just a miserable worm that deserves to be wiped off the earth? There's this weird paradox in Catholicism. A lot of Catholicism is weird paradoxes, but there's specifically this one, and it's this fact that there are two things happening at the same time in the human person. At one and the same time, we are both completely worthless and completely priceless. Our human existence is basically meaningless, right? I mean, it's meaningful because of God, but I'm saying we don't really have a lot to offer. We're here because God put us here, and we have our wills that we can unite to God's will, but really at the end of the day, we're pretty weak, we're pretty pathetic, and we tend to get it wrong more often than we get it right. But what's funny is that is not a reason to be down on yourself. That's not a problem. That is what it is. And at the same time that that's true, what's also true is that the God of the universe who made you wants nothing more. He desires with a desire that you can't even fathom, to be united to you, to be one with you for eternity. And understanding that goes a long way to helping you begin to untwist your own image of yourself. Now, don't get me wrong, and we'll get to this later in the video, don't get me wrong, a lot of these ways that you look at yourself are based off of incorrect beliefs and emotional damage and trauma that you have, most likely. But the reality is you are not a worthless worm. You are a human person with infinite value, created by God and destined for eternity. And it really is a shame when the human person sees themselves as worthless, when the human person hates themselves, while the God of the universe could not love them more. So that's where you start. How do you see God? And how do you see yourself? On our show, Catholic Late Night, we have a saying which is, your goal should be to see what God sees when you look in the mirror. When you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror, do you see what God sees? Do you see the person that God delights in? Because he does. He delights in you, his creation, his child. Do you see what God sees when you look in the mirror? And if the answer is no, start there. So moving on, again, in the concept of starting, right? Where do you start? You want to start small, right? If you're dealing with a pornography addiction, it's almost guaranteed that you are also dealing with other areas where you don't control yourself well. It's almost guaranteed that you are perhaps overeating or over drinking or whatever it is, right? It may be food, it may be alcohol, it may be video games, it may be overspending, anything, or it may be all of these things at the same time. But the reality is that if you are struggling with a pornography addiction, your willpower is going to be weakened, in some cases significantly, and you are going to be much more likely to struggle with things like self-control, things like willpower, and that's where you start. It doesn't make any sense at all to climb Mount Everest if you've never walked up a hill before. But that's how most people treat their porn addictions. They think, well, once I get porn out of the way, I can address all these other areas of my life where I have problems. But that's like a person who's lived their whole life on the beaches in California, just throwing on a parka and flying to Mount Everest and going, all right, we're going up. Makes no sense. None. If you're going to climb Mount Everest, I think anyone who's ever climbed Mount Everest and lived to tell about it would tell you that you're probably looking at many, many years of preparation, many, many years of effort, practicing on smaller mountains, learning how to climb, building up your stamina, right? So if you're going to climb the Mount Everest, which is pornography, you got to start small. You got to start with things that you can actually accomplish. And the first thing to do there is to find patterns. You want to find the patterns in your life that lead to pornography, because they're there. You want to see whenever I look at porn, you want to start reverse engineering that thing, right? So I looked at porn, what happened? What led up to that? Write it down, catalog it. And next time it happens, do it again. And then do it again and again and again. And I don't care if you're looking at porn once a day or several times a day. Every time you look at porn, write down what was going on that led up to it. And then the farther you go along that path, you will start to see those patterns, and then you back up further from there. And as you back up on those patterns, you'll begin to see that you actually can predict a setback a week ahead of time, because you've become so comfortable with the patterns. You see them in your life. So start small and find the patterns. Next, you're going to want to cut out the things that lead to porn. This sounds obvious, but here's an example, right? I like beer. I don't drink excessively ever, but I like to have a beer. And what I found was that when I would have beer, it would almost universally lead to me looking at porn. I was like, all right, I got to get the beer out. And it took me about 2 years to stop drinking beer, but I finally cut ties with all alcohol for about a 9-month period. And in that 9-month period, 2 things happened. The first is I was able to retrain my brain to think about alcohol differently, so that I can now have a beer and it doesn't have to immediately mean I look at porn, which it used to. But at the same time, it was a win. I was able to actually accomplish a self-control thing in my life. I was able to actually say no to something for an extended period of time, and the only reason I went back to it was because it was my choice. And that was very powerful for me. It was a good thing. So you got to cut out the things that lead to porn. If it's late night TV, if it's a certain video game, if it's conversations, if it's a podcast you listen to, if it's a radio show you listen to, if it's music you listen to, whatever it is, if it's stuff that leads to porn, it's got to go. And finally, you're going to want to celebrate the wins, no matter how small they are. You have to celebrate the wins. You want to look for places where you can go, I achieved something, right? Even if it's literally that when you wake up in the morning, you made it 5 minutes without looking at your phone, right? It doesn't matter. You need to celebrate the wins, because you have to give yourself a reason to keep going. You have to show yourself you can make improvement. And that's why starting small is so important, and that's why celebrating even the tiniest wins is so important. That's how you build momentum. It's how you build your own motivation. Setting big goals that you'll never accomplish is a recipe for failure. Start small, celebrate the smallest wins. So now we're going to move on to understanding your porn addiction. This is a much more complicated topic, and I'm going to try to make it as simple as I possibly can. There's a concept in psychology that's known as the inner child. What this means is that there really is a part of you that is essentially kind of a frozen in time version of yourself from your childhood. Most psychologists say that between the ages of 0 and 2 years old is when we form our self-identity. It's when we learn how to see ourselves. And unfortunately, between the ages of 0 and 2 years old is also when most people are pretty screwed up by their parents, to be honest, because they cry a lot and their parents get frustrated, or they just don't handle it well. Or they do things like cry it out in the crib, where they leave them in their crib to cry while they go, to try to sleep train them, or whatever it is, right? There are things that are done to kids in that 0 to 2 year old frame of time that tend to leave lasting scars. But it's not just there. From that point onward as well, then as you grow up and you begin to have an ability to actually experience the world and have memories and think through these things, that original perception of yourself is either contradicted or it's confirmed, right? So that first 2 years, it's either, well, that's not really who I am. Like, I kind of think that, but it looks like from the way I'm being treated that's actually not true. And that helps you make some progress in not maybe getting sucked into some of these, emotional wounds. But if your experience continues to be, no, that's totally who I am. If I cry, I'm not worth comforting. If I make a mistake, I'm immediately punished for it, and I'm not allowed to make mistakes because I have to be perfect the first time. And right, all these things that kind of get beat into our heads by our parents very often. And this is no reflection on parents. We all do our best, but this is a simple truth that needs to be acknowledged. If you are a porn addict, you cannot run from the fact that it's almost guaranteed that you have some at least mild but probably significant emotional and mental wounds from your childhood. And these are most likely going to be related to your parents. This is not a victim mentality. This is not blaming anyone. But if you want to beat porn, you can't hide from this reality. And if you are going to hide from it, you're never going to get better. It's very, very, very difficult to make progress when you won't address the root cause. Your pornography is a symptom. Always remember that. So what happens is that over time, basically, a little part of you kind of gets frozen in time. Basically, you kind of build up this emotional damage, and you get to a point where you can't really handle any more pain. And at that point, you kind of shut down emotionally, and you don't let anything else in, but that also means that nothing can get out. And it's arrested development. A part of you gets basically frozen as a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, whatever it is. And that inner child is really a major part of your pornography addiction. That inner child is really driving a lot of these behaviors because it's very likely that your inner child was you at that age. And when you got into pornography, what happened was you reached a point where you couldn't handle the emotional strain anymore. You couldn't handle the pain. You couldn't handle the pressure, whatever it was. And you found pornography, and it set you free. It protected you. It gave you something to escape in. And at that point, your inner child basically froze there. This has been my experience. This may not be your experience, but everyone has some version of this, right? There's some element of this in everyone's story. And understanding these things is at least a good place to start in terms of trying to look back into your past and start to see where some of these wounds may have begun, and start to see where you can trace your porn addiction back to, right? But your inner child is very important because what's missing for your inner child is the fact that you've grown up, right? And so it's important that you begin a dialogue with your inner child. And I don't want this to sound weird. You're not schizophrenic, but there really are kind of pieces that make up our psyche. And, there's a Jesuit priest who wrote a series of books that are just very powerful. And one of them is called The Secret of Staying in Love. And in it, he talks about this idea of the child, the adult, and the parent. And basically, throughout our life, there are these kind of three competing voices that go on in our psyche. And the inner child is basically who we were as a kid. The adult is who we are now. It's basically our rational adult self. And the parent are all of the beliefs that we have from our parents. And basically, the parent and the child are kind of always at odds inside of us. And the job of the adult is to teach the parent and the child the truth about themselves. And I know this sounds borderline like schizophrenia. It's not. It's not. One of the reasons why so many people struggle with these things is because there's a lot of fear around psychology. Like, if you start to dive into this stuff, you're going to somehow lose your identity, and that's not true. I strongly encourage that you read books by Catholic psychologists. Dr. Greg Bottaro is a good example. Dr. Gregory Popchak is a good example. And look up good sources of Catholic psychology. Secular psychologists can be very crazy, and there's definitely things that are dangerous about some of the stuff that they say. But in terms of the way the mind works, and in terms of understanding our childhood wounds, this stuff is very real and it's very important. And if you can't face it and you can't begin to heal, it will haunt you the rest of your life, in many cases in the form of your pornography addiction. So something that was incredibly powerful for me, that was just very life-changing, was when I realized that I had to love my porn addiction. So there's a couple things that happened for me that helped me start to have a whole new way of looking at my own self and of loving myself, that were very instrumental in achieving peace in ways that I never had before. And one of these was that I had always seen my porn addiction as the enemy, right? I was always saying, like, okay, I hate my porn addiction. I hate porn. I don't want this. I want to get this out of my life as fast as I possibly can. Now, obviously, all of those things are true. I hate porn. It's disgusting. I don't want it in my life. It's a horrible thing, and it's destroying people's lives. But the part that I was missing was the fact that I was looking at porn was a part of me. The porn addiction represented a piece of myself that was using the porn to fill a legitimate need it had. And that was a missing piece for me, because every time I said I hate porn addiction, I hate my porn addiction, what I was really saying to myself was, I hate the part of me that wants to look at porn. And those are two completely different things. So you have to understand that your porn addiction represents you. It represents a wound, a gaping hole somewhere inside of you. All the porn is what's being used to keep that piece of you satisfied because it's missing what it needed at some point in your life or right now or whatever the reason may be. But when you understand that loving your porn addiction is not about loving porn or even loving the fact that you look at porn, it's about realizing that you are looking at porn because of a reason. And a part of you is missing something. A part of you that needs love. A part of you that you have to acknowledge so that you can fill that gaping hole with something other than porn. But if all you ever do is see porn and go, I hate you, porn, you miss the part of you that's behind the porn. I think about it this way. I had an experience inside of my own psyche where I realized, I saw that when porn presented itself to me, when I was finding myself in a temptation, when I am in that space where you're thinking, oh golly, man, I'm gonna end up looking at porn now, right? I realized what was happening was the part of myself that is using the porn, the part of myself that's hurt, was bringing the porn to me as a cry for help. When the porn presented itself in my mind as like, this seems like a great idea, I realized that it was almost like, my inner child was walking towards me, and if I looked up, what I saw was a giant shield. I saw this shield moving towards me, and I'm like, oh gosh, who's this person coming to attack me? But in reality, there's me behind it. And the shield is there because I don't trust myself. The shield is there because I have refused to listen for so long, and because everyone else refused to listen as well. And I wasn't giving myself what I needed. I'm not giving myself what I need. So understand that your porn addiction is you. They're not the same, right? Like, looking at porn is an evil. Pornography is an evil. But the part of you that wants to engage in that is not evil. And when porn presents itself, that's what's happening. So start trying to understand, or start trying to train yourself to think, when porn comes, when I want porn, it's really a part of me saying, I want something more. And instead of saying, get behind me, Satan, open your arms and say welcome. Because you're not welcoming the porn. You're welcoming the part of you that's hiding behind the porn. This is very important, and this was something that's very helpful for me. I had some experiences a few months ago, actually, that were very groundbreaking for me. When I realized that I had been treating my inner child all wrong. And I had a moment where I was deep in a temptation of pornography. It was just racking me, and I was struggling with it. And I was just asking myself, why do you want this? Why do I why is this something that just I can't let go? Why do I have to keep doing this? And I had this moment where I realized, similarly to what I'm saying right now about the porn protecting me, I realized I'm seeing this as the enemy when it's really a part of me that's trying to ask for help. And so I said to myself, I reached deep inside my own mind, I said, thank you. And in that moment, the porn urge drained away completely. And I was able to connect to my inner child, a part of myself that was hiding behind the pornography in a way that I never had before. And I had this flood of, kind of conversation, interior dialogue, so to speak, where I had some very interesting realizations. And basically what happened in that moment was I thanked myself, because the reality is the pornography addiction that I struggle with is a form of protection. It's a form of some part of me protecting me from something. And I may not understand what it is. I don't understand what it is entirely. I'm beginning to. But that protection, which again, make sure you hear what I'm saying correctly. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying that porn is good. But I'm saying that the protection, the part of me that's trying to hide behind the porn, is trying to keep me safe from some kind of pain, some kind of fear that I see or that I learned at some point in time. And when I thanked myself for that, instead of judging myself for that, then that I could have that trust rebuilt, and I could connect with that part of myself that was basically ostracized and was going rogue, so to speak. At that point in time, I was then able to realize that the reason that I got into porn was because it was the only thing that took away the pain. I had a very tumultuous childhood. I was basically raised by a single mom because my dad worked all the time. And it's no reflection on either of them. I love them to death, but my mom and I butted heads a lot, and I genuinely felt unloved as a child. I felt very out of place. I felt very alone, and I was missing things that I needed to be a whole person. And that's why I looked at porn. And it took away the pain. And from that point on, it was the thing that protected me from the pain. And I had this kind of interior dialogue with myself where I realized this. And that was a major breakthrough for me in terms of being able to see where the porn was coming from and being able to now have a new way to experience the urges and the addiction when it came. And so understanding your porn addiction, understanding that there are parts of you that are trapped kind of behind these barriers in time and behind wounds that have happened to you and behind the porn addiction itself. They're pieces of you that need to get integrated back in. You are fragmented inside. And the goal is to get integrated again. You want to bring all of those pieces back. And as you begin to do that and you begin to find these pieces of yourself and welcome them home, then they're no longer trying to hide behind the pornography. They're on your side again. And as you do this, you begin to find these cravings lessen. You begin to find the addiction diminishing. This is very, very important, and this is something that isn't talked about enough, especially in the Catholic circles around pornography. So from here, we're going to move on to emotional health, because that's a big part of what we're talking about. Emotional health is a very broad thing to say, right? So I'm going to make it very practical and straightforward. The first thing I did that started me on the journey of emotional health was enrolling in a program. I enrolled in reclaimsexualhealth.com, which is it's a Catholic program for people struggling with porn addiction. A priest that I went to confession to, for my penance, he said, check it out. You don't have to sign up, but I want you to check it out. That's your penance. So I looked it up, and it was $50 a month. It had all the videos. It has all this stuff. It has a whole forum for the students to talk to each other. It has a coach that they give you, and I started doing it. I learned a ton through that program. In fact, I also was able to, make some breaks with pornography for, up to 6 months even at a time. And those lessons and those teachings in that course really started me on a journey of emotional health. About a year and a half after I started that program is when I kind of had a mental breakdown, which was related to the porn, but not really. It was more once the porn went away, once I had made some progress fighting the porn, all of these problems that it was masking started really bubbling up, and I just basically started losing my mind. And that's when I went to get professional help, which is the next thing I'll talk about. If you want porn out of your life, I'm not saying you have to go spend, the next 20 years of your life in therapy. But if you really want this out of your life and you really feel like you don't know what to do and you're struggling on your own, you should seriously consider psychological help. There are online counselors you can get access to. There are trauma therapists that will even do, remote sessions. There are Catholic psychologists you can find if you get on, I think it's catholicpsych.net or catholicpsych.com. Dr. Greg Bottaro has a whole collection of people that he will recommend. But professional help is important. Just like you wouldn't try to teach yourself your college degree, you need someone to guide you through this process. Psychology is one of the biggest gray areas in the world right now. And especially in the Catholic community, there is this strong emphasis on kind of just letting God work. And that's good. We need God's help, but we also need to understand our human nature. We are a body and a soul. We are not a body and a soul. We're both together at the same time all the time. And dualism has really crept into the church in a major way in the modern Catholic mind. And it's very important that you are able to understand how your body and your soul are connected and how your human wounds, your physical, biological, mental, psychological wounds affect your spiritual life. That professional help is very important on that journey. And lastly, educate yourself, okay? Like, emotional health is really about being at peace with who you are. But you can't do that when you have a million belief systems that tell you you're worthless. When you have a million belief systems that tell you you are no good and you don't deserve happiness, you don't deserve peace, you deserve to rot in hell, which is how a lot of Catholic porn addicts feel. I was one of them. It's very difficult to label anything remotely close to that as emotionally healthy. And so educating yourself on how to make progress with psychological issues is very important. There are many books you can read. Again, I mentioned some Catholic psychologists. But really, starting with the idea of childhood trauma, emotional wounds, and trying to understand how those impact us, how those shape our addiction is very important. So that's the practical and the natural side of what I want to talk about. I want to share. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I want to talk a little bit about working with God in all of this. St. Padre Pio has a quote that says, "Pray as if everything depends on God, but work as if everything depends on you." And I think this is really important because, especially in something like pornography addiction, it can become incredibly easy to either say, I've got to do it all on my own, or to say, I can't do anything, you're going to have to just take this away from me, God. And those are the two extremes to which most people end up falling. I have kind of ping-ponged back and forth between both of them over my whole journey. But recently, certainly last year to 18 months, I have really begun to formulate kind of a system of understanding how it works, that it's all God and it's all us at the same time. Because it is, and it has to be that way. God can't just drag us out of it. So here's the first thing to understand. Our wounds are what God uses to heal us. This is really important. There's a Switchfoot song called "The Wound is Where the Light Shines Through." I love the song because that line is perfect. He says, "The wound is where the light shines through. The wound is where the love finds you." And if you think about it that way, then you can really understand where we're hurting is where God is working, right? We're trying to grow closer to God. But God's already there. He's already in our wounds. And instead of trying to basically get our wounds healed so we can find God, we need to go to the wounds because He's there working already. But He can't work if we don't go and say, okay, let's do this together. God's at the wound, but you're running from the wound. And in that case, you're running from God. So understanding that if you want to make progress in your porn addiction, you need to embrace the porn addiction. You need to embrace the wound. You need to embrace the pain and ask God to come into that pain. When you do that, you're doing your part, right? So God can work with you when you're willing to do your part. But it's not just that willingness to accept God in, it's also what are you physically doing? I think back to the parable of the farmer and who prepared his fields for rain, right? He didn't sit in his kitchen table and say, all right, God, if I'm supposed to grow crops, make it happen, right? God could send the rain whenever he so chose, but only the man could plow the fields. Only the man could spread the seed. God isn't going to just go to a farmer and just say, magic, field, there you go, you've got your crops. So understand that in order for God to heal you, you have to be doing the work of healing, which means things like learning about your psychology, learning about your wounds, asking God to help you find where the wounds are, having difficult conversations with people who've hurt you, which is likely your parents, beginning to put habits in place to help you have psychological and emotional health, spending time in silence, spending time in prayer, doing holy hours, praying rosaries, right? These are all things that you can do. And so if you can't, you can't just sit there and go, okay, God, I accept you into my wounds, heal me. You have to put in the work. The next thing I want to talk about is confession. This is definitely a struggle for porn addicts because it's hard to go back to confession over and over and over and over again and just keep going to confession, right? And so what I'll say is that I strongly recommend that you find a priest, tell them about your porn addiction, and ask them if they can become your regular confessor, and then go to that priest. I would also strongly recommend that you find a spiritual director, and that can be the same person. In fact, it's probably better if it is. But you need to pray to the Holy Spirit to help you find the right priest, and then you need to basically try to go to confession to them when you go to confession. And I don't think that there's a reason to not go to confession as soon as you can after you have setbacks, even if that means you're going every single day, even if that meant that you went twice a day. The reality is that the faster you are back into the state of grace, the faster you have been forgiven for the sin, the better for your soul it is, and the more likely it is for you to make progress. In addition, understand that confession is not just about washing away our sins. Confession gives us grace. And so instead of thinking of confession as this thing that is like, okay, I gotta go get it, I gotta get my sins washed away, think of it like going to the gym. It's strengthening you. When you go to confession, you are first of all acknowledging your sin again and again and again, which helps you humble yourself, and it helps you accept God's love, because there isn't a limit on the confessions you can go to, which is because God's mercy is infinite. So let confession show you who God is, right? Back to that image of God idea. Let confession show you who God is. God is there all the time. He's there saying, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I love you, I love you, I love you. Over and over and over again. So stop seeing confession as a negative. It's a positive. It's beautiful. Then also, the Mass and the Rosary need to become your best friend. You need the Mass and the Rosary. You need to pray more, and you need to go to Mass. Now, I struggle a lot with putting prayer time aside in my day, which is why the Mass and the Rosary are great for me. My wife and I try to go to Mass. We try to go to Mass every morning, and on the way to Mass, we pray the Rosary. And so, at the start of our day, before anything else has happened, we've prayed a Rosary and we've gone to Mass. And I can tell you, the days I don't do it, the days we miss, I feel worse. I am much more open and less likely to be strong in the face of porn temptations or urges. And if I do it for any extended period of time, if we miss for like 3 days or a week, or we don't make it for any extended period of time, my life starts to fall apart. Literally, right? I become depressed. I struggle with work, and everything starts to crumble. The Mass and the Rosary are powerful. And here's something that it took me a long time to come to terms with. I never wanted to go to Mass if I'd looked at porn recently, right? I never wanted to go to Mass until I'd gone to confession. Stop doing that. go to Mass. Don't receive communion, go to Mass. First of all, it will make you go to confession because you could just go ask the priest, or most of the time they're offering confessions either before or after Masses. So you'll go to confession more if you do it. But secondly, that will still put you back in the right mindset. Going to Mass and letting God be there and saying, I'm sorry, Jesus. I'm sorry again. I want to keep doing. Give me the grace. Help me to do this. It puts you back in the mindset. It's good for your humanity to do that. And lastly, you need to consecrate yourself to Mary. You need to make a consecration to Mary, a formal one. And I strongly suggest doing the 33 Days to Morning Glory consecration with Father Michael Gately. That's a book. Just type in 33 Days to Morning Glory on Amazon. It's a great book. I strongly recommend doing that one. You can do the St. Louis de Montfort one, but do a formal consecration to Mary, and that will be a very powerful part of your life as well. All right, so moving forward, guys. I know I've thrown a lot at you. No matter what happens, never give up. Never, ever give up. This is the fight of your life. This is the thing that may take you years and years and years to beat. That's okay. Understand that this is a journey and that God is calling you to Him through this journey. Stop hating yourself. Stop looking at yourself as this unlovable piece of garbage and start looking at yourself as a child who's slowly being drawn back to the Father, because that's what's going on. And you have the choice. You can either turn around and walk the same direction, or you can keep trying to walk away. Either way, God's pulling, but you're going to make that progress a lot slower if you're constantly fighting at every step of the way. And God won't always pull. If you choose to walk away from God, He'll let you go. That's what our free will is for. Turn around, face God, and keep facing Him. You can't go wrong as long as you are trying to walk towards God. So let go of your pride. Let go of your self-hatred, your self-doubt, your fears. Trust God. Tell Him that you don't know who He is. Tell Him that you want to know Him more deeply, and that you struggle, and that you're weak, and that you're in pain. Tell Him. He knows, and He loves you. And He's the only person, the only thing in this universe that can give you what you really want, that can give you what porn is that you're trying to get from porn. It's God, really, that you're looking for. Also understand that porn can only take what you let it, right? Don't be a victim to porn. Don't let porn steal things from you. Don't let it destroy your relationships. Don't let it destroy your life. Be transparent with the people around you that you love. If it's your spouse, then tell them and be honest with them and accept what happens. If it's, your community, if it's your church, I'm not saying get up, an announcement at Mass, but so many people are struggling with this. The communication of the struggle is very important because of all the secrecy and the mystery and the shame around pornography in the Catholic Church. That's why so many people are struggling. This has to be brought out into the light. We have to bring this back into the open conversation so that we can talk about it in normal terms. We can make it something that isn't this horrifying stigma. We have to get back to where we can help people with this, and you can be a part of that. You can choose to accept that you are valuable and lovable no matter what, and that God can work through your brokenness to help other people who are struggling with the same problem. Finally, stay humble and love yourself, okay? Understand that you are a human person. You are not God. You are not perfect. You never will be perfect. Stop looking at other people and thinking, man, my life would be better if only I didn't have my porn problem. Like they don't have a porn problem. Look at how great their life must be. Stop doing that. You are you. God made you. You have a mission. He needs something from you that only you can do. So start accepting that. Start asking God, how can I serve you? Stop looking around and saying, man, if only I didn't have this porn addiction, then my life would be fine. No. This is your cross, so bear it well. Pick it up and carry it. But understand that you are not capable of anything. So whatever it is that's supposed to happen in your life, whatever good you're supposed to accomplish, God will accomplish through you. And your porn addiction can't stop that. Your porn addiction can't take that from you. It can't take God from you. It can't take His will from you. So stay humble and love yourself. And always remember, no matter what's going on, no matter how bad it seems, no matter how many times you've looked at porn in the last week or day or hour, God loves you. That will never, ever change. No amount of sin, no amount of pornography, no amount of anything that you can possibly do can take that love away from you. So accept it because it's true. God loves you. Pray for me. I will pray for you. God bless on this journey. You can do it. God is with you. And always remember that God loves you.